Today's daf is daf Zayin. We'll start with the Mishnah. Ketzad Osala. What's the procedure by which we take the Sotah for Hashkah after the local Bezdin has already received, after integrating Edim on the Kiri and the Stira? Molichin leBezdin Sheboso Makom. So that's the first stage where he lives, he takes her, or at least he takes the Edim, subpoenas them to Bezdin in that place. And that's where the Makabal the Edus on the Kinui, on the Stira. And then Mosrim Lo, Bezdin will appoint Shnei Talmidei Chachamim to escort the couple to Yerushalayim and to supervise and guarantee that they don't have a relationship. Otherwise, we don't know if he may have had relations with her on the way up to Yerushalayim, which would mean that even though he is asur to have relations with her, because once she's a Sotah, is Raglaim Labda Shenitma, he's not allowed to have relations with her, but nevertheless he may violate that if the Yetzer Hara gets the best of him. And in such a case, if he violated that Isur, then the Mayim do not have the power to be Bodek. And then Shem Shamayim would be obliterated in vain. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Bala Neman Aleha. Rabbi Yehuda says that we don't need to send two Talmidei Chacham to escort them and to oversee them, but rather he's not going to sin with her on the way. That's the assumption of Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says the following. In the Mishnah, it says that there are two Talmidei Chachamim that escort them, Trei ve'iu, which means together with the Baal, Hatlasa, there are three men who will be alone with one woman on the road going up to the Bezdin in Yerushalayim. And that's the Bezdin HaGadol of 71 elders that sat in the Lishkas HaGozos. Lema V'sayle l'Rav D'Yom Rav Yudam Rav Lo Shanu. When the Mishnah at the end of Kiddushin establishes that a woman is allowed to have she's allowed to be together or secluded with two men, Ela Be'ir, that heter of relying on two men with one woman, according to Rav, only applies within the city. Aval B'derech, but on the road, it's prohibited adika shlosha unless you have three men with one woman. Shemi yitzarech echad mem l'nikavav. If one of the two men, if there are only two men, will have to use the outhouse there, and he's going to have to go far away because it's tznius, nimtza echad mehem es yachid im ha'erva. Then there's only one man alone with one woman, and that's a violation of the Isur Yichud. But if it's in the city, if one of them has to use the nikavav, then the second one, Yochel Hasheni Lotzis Me'abayis V'lo Lischat Yachid Ima. He could just simply walk out of the house. But in the case of an open area like the derech, that's not a possibility, and it's outside the city, and therefore, if one man goes lasos nekov, the other man is left alone with her in violation of the Isur Yichud. And from the fact that our Mishnah requires two Talmidei Chachamim, that would seem to be a proof until the Gemara slugs it up to support Rav's opinion that outside the city, we have to be machmir, we have to require no less than three men with one woman. And the Gemara rejects it low. Hacha, hainu taima, here in our Mishnah, there's another reason why we need to mitzaref two men together with the Baal, but it has nothing to do with Yichud, but rather ki hechi de lehevi alei sahadi. That in event that the Baal cannot overcome his desire and he has a relationship with her on the way, then we have two Eidim who could testify in front of the Bezdin HaGadol that he had that relationship, and therefore they will not be mashka her from the Meimerorim. The Gemara is now medayik from the language of the Mishnah. It says Talmidei Chachamim in Kuli Amalo. Why is it necessary for the accompaniment, the escort, to be comprised of two Talmidei Chachamim? And the answer is Le Messiah Le Idat Rav this would support another statement of Rabbi Yehuda Marav that Lo Shanu in the Mishnah allows a woman to be alone with two men, Elek Sherim. Avol Prutzim Afilu Asara Nami Lo. So the Gemara assumes that Talmidei Chachamim means Ksherim as opposed to Prutzim. And in the case of Prutzim, even if you have 10 men with one woman alone, that 10 men is still considered Yichud. And I wrote an article about this in Tchumin, in which I claim that there may be even public areas where the assumption is that there are Prutzim and it's not public, it's private. Votziu Maisa Hoya, there was a story that happened. Votziua Asara B'mita. And it says here that there were a married woman and 10 Prutzim went out in order to Yechoshvu. They thought that it's time to take this woman out to burial, so they carried her out to burial, v'chatuba. And as it turns out, she was not dead, and they had a relationship with her. I don't know how many of them, but chatuba. And therefore, from the fact that our Mishnah requires Talmidei Chachamim that would accompany the Baal and the Isha, that would support this chumrah of Rav, that no matter how many men there are, they have to, in order to be Mata Yichud, they have to be Ksherim. And the Gemara rejects it low. We need Talmidei Chachamim to escort them so that they can warn the husband and the wife, and mainly the husband in this case, to say that the halacha is that if the Baal's menuka v'avan and he has a relationship with her, then the Mayim do not have the power of efficacy to be bodek the Isha. So they will warn the Baal about that so that he won't sin. And because if he does sin, then there won't be a b'dikas Isha. The Mishnah quotes Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Baila Neman Alel. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Baal is never, there's no need to accompany them on the way to the Bezna Gadol, because the Baal is Neman. And he's not choshed in znus. Tanya, we learned in the price. So Rabbi Yehuda Omer Bala Neman Mikal V'chomer. Rabbi Yehuda derived the reliability of a Baal from the following Kal V'chomer. Uman nidashi b'karis Bala Neman aleo. In a case of a man who's married to a woman and she's in nida, then even though it's an isa kares, nevertheless the Baal is Neman aleo. We don't require a matir of yichud. He's allowed to be secluded with his own wife. And Sotah shiva lav, in the case of a Sotah, where the violation would only generate a lav but not a kares, as it says, lo yuchal baila rishon asher shilcha lashuv lekachta lios lo liisha achrei asher hutama. Is lo kolshkein, how much more so, argues Rabbi Yehuda, is the Baal believed, and we could trust him that he wouldn't sin with her, and therefore there's no need to accompany him with Eidim and with Talmidei Chachamim. For Rabbanan, he had no sedes. Rabbanan say on the contrary, just the opposite. In the case of Nida, which is an Isa Chomer of Kares, there he's believed he will control his Yetzer, but because Chamirale, and therefore he's Mehema. But Sotah, which is only a Lav, Lo Chamirale, he's not so machmir about a Lav, and therefore Lo Mehemen, he may have a relationship with her, and therefore we require these two witnesses. So the Gemara has now effectively rejected the Kal V'chomer of Rabbi Yehuda. For Rabbi Yehuda mi Kal V'chomer Maisila, is it really so that Rabbi Yehuda derives his conclusion that the Baal is Neman V'ishta from a Kal V'chomer, as we mentioned earlier? V'ha Rabbi Yehuda Mikroi Maisila. I'm going to show you from a brisa that Rabbi Yehuda derived his conclusion based on a pasuk. The Sanya we learned in a brisa. In the parsha of Sotah, it says Vehevi ha'ish es ishto el hakohen, and it seems to imply that Minatorah, according to the biblical law, ha'ish maybe es ishto, he alone is there to bring his wife to the high court, and he's believed. But the Rabbana made a chumrah. They said we're not going to rely on him, but rather most from those Shnei Talmidei Chacham Shem Yovo Lev Baderech. Rabbi Yossi Omer Bailo Nemen Olev Mikal V'Chomer. Uma Nida Shiba Kares Bailo Nemen Olev Sotah Shiba Lav Kol Shkei. So this was the Kal V'Chomer that we suggested earlier in order to explain Rabbi Yehuda. Omru Lo, the Chacham responded, Lo. You don't have any proof for that logic based on your Kal V'Chomer. A person could overcome any sort of yetzer that would pull him by impulse to violate an Isur Nida with his wife because he knows that after a certain time period, she'll count Zayin Nikiyim, she'll be Mitayr herself, and therefore Ein Yitzro Misgabrolov. But Tomar, in the case of Sotah, Shem Lo Heter, in the case of Sotah, there's an Isur Olam, and therefore his Yetzer Hara is going to work overtime, and we have to be choshesh that maybe he'll sin with her. Now, you may say that he already had a relationship with her, so why would he have such a great Yetzer Hara, especially when there's a suspicion that she was guilty of adultery? And the Gemara answers, Omer, the pasuk says in Mishlei, Mayim Knuvu Yim Taku. And what this means is that when something is asur, the Yetzer Hara works overtime and is able to allure him and trap him. Rav Yehuda Omer, Rav Min Torah Ish Mevius Ishto LaKohen, Shenemar Vehevi Ish Es Ishto. So the simple meaning of the pasuk clearly indicates that a Baal can take his wife without any chaperones whatsoever in order to bring her to drink from the Mei Morarim in the Beis HaMikdash. So now we have a problem with two brises. One brise said the Rav Yehuda is based on a Kal V'Chomer from Nida, and the other brise says Rav Yehuda darshan the pasuk that says Behevi or Ishas Ishta. How do we reconcile this? Amar Lahu, Rav Yehuda would say the following: Kal V'Chomer Bereisha. Let's start with the Kal V'Chomer Upirchua, and then you'll have your kasha, the Rabbana and the Pircha, to object against the Kal V'Chomer. For Hadar Amar Lahu Kra. After the Rabbanan raised the objection against Rav Yehuda's Kal V'Chomer, because maybe Dafka in the case of Nida, because there's a heter afterwards, therefore we could be Mekil, is then Hadar Amar Lahu Kra. Then Rabbi Yehuda darshan the pasuk. Gemara asks the following kasha: Rabbi Yehuda Hainu Tanakama. After all, the Brisa quoted the Tanakama. Both of them held that according to Torah law, the Baal is never be ishto, and not choshish he'll have a sin with her. He could pay now. What's the difference between Tanakama Rabbi Yehuda? Aval Amru. The Tanakama holds that even though in Torah the Baal is Neman, but nevertheless the Rabbanu were Machmir, and they created an Isur D'Rabbanan. But Rabbi Yehuda holds no. We're not choshesh that he might sin with her, and therefore there's no need to add to his bringing her to the Beis Hamikdash an escort. The Mishnah says, "Hayu ma'ilin osol lebez nagol shebiyushalayim uma'ayimol lekedesh ma'ayimol edei nefashos." What they did was, when she got to the Beis Hamikdash, they would kind of like spook her out, just like when Eidim come to testify in a capital crime, a capital case. We warn the Eidim and we try to get them to, to be absolutely sure, and if not, to drop it. And here also, we're pressuring her to get her to the point where she will confess, because once she confesses that she's guilty, we no longer have to obliterate the name of God. The Omerla. And this is what the members of the court of the Beis Nagoro would say to her to try to get her to confess the crime. Biti. Now, the word biti is a little bit odd in this place. I mean, we're talking about a woman who violated stira and is chshuda biznus of an Eishes Ish, and we call her biti. So the Kol Sofer gives the following answer. that the intention here is to remind her that she is a Bas Yisrael, and even if she was guilty of a sin of znus, she should not cause that the Shem Hashem should be obliterated. Harbe Yayin Osa. Yayin has a power to create a kisholon ba'avera, and Harbe Schokosa, and kind of joking around. I mean, real improper. That's also creating kisholon ba'avera. That's also generates it, as Rabbi Kiva says in Avos Per Gimel, Schok v'kalos rosh margilin la erva. So to Harbe Yaldus Osa, maybe she wasn't trained from her childhood in the right chinuch, or maybe sometimes even a more mature person acts like a child who's self-centered and interested in pleasure. And if she has neighbors in that neighborhood that are evil, they may drag her down. They know how to seduce her. Asi lishmo agadol shenichtav b'kedusha shlo yimche al hamayim. Concede, meaning admit your guilt for the sake of the holy name of God, which is going to be erased and obliterated. The Omer lefaneh dvarim she'enam kidei l'shoman. He v'chol mishpachas beis of you. The Gemara is going to clarify this on Zayin Amid Beis, but we're going to try to explain to her and to her family that the original tzaddikim like Yehuda v'Maaseh Tova, Reuven v'Maaseh Bilhah, they all came forward to confess their sins and they were zochet olam haba. And all this is to try to influence her and to encourage her to concede and do tshuva. And then we don't have to go through this whole process of mechikas Hashem. Im Amra, if a woman says Tmeani, she says that during the stira with Ploni Almoni, she had a relationship. Is shoveres ksubasa v'yotzes. Right, she's going to have to write a shovar indicating a receipt of her ksuba. And on the shovar, she writes, Zanisi v'ibadati ksubasi. I lost my rights to the ksuba v'yotzes, and the Baal will divorce her. But she cannot be punished by Bezdin for a capital crime, since a person cannot incriminate themselves. V'im omer tahorani, still she insists that she was guiltless. Ma'alim osel shar mizrach, they bring her to the entryway into the Harabayis, and they continue with her until they get to the Shar Nikanor, and that's where they did the Hashka of Sotos, as the pasuk says, "Vehem midah lifnei Hashem umetarim es hayoldos," and that's the place in which we bring the oldos to Lamod al Karbonoseim metarim es hamitzora mitzoroim, as the pasuk says, first with regard to Yoledes, Vehemidol Hashem, and with regard to a mitzvah, it says Vehemid Hakoin Amitayr Saish Amitayr Osam Lifnei Hashem Peskolmon. The Kohen Oches Biodel and Bibgadel, excuse me, and the Kohen holds on to the collar of her garment, Im Nikru, and he doesn't have to be choshesh that maybe it'll get ripped. The Im Nifru, or let's say there were many smaller rips, he doesn't have to pay any attention to them. Niframu, and sometimes the threads come apart. Achu megalas liba, v'soseres sa'ara. This is an act of nivel and busha. Rabbi Yudomer im hayoliba na lo hay megaleu. Im hayas sa'ara na lo hayas soser. right? We're afraid that maybe she'll turn out to be guiltless, and the Tzeirei Kohanim have seen her part of the body, and then when it was exposed, that might cause them to be Megara the Yetzer Hara. Hoysem is Kaseh b'Levanim, Mechaseh b'Shchorim. And if she beautified herself by wearing lighter clothes, then we're going to require that she wear dark clothes. If she had sort of jewelry that was made of gold, the katlios, and various kinds of chains, neck chains, necklaces that were on her tzavar, or nizamim, or she had various jewelry, takshitim, for the nose, for the ears, vitabaos, and rings on her hand, mavirin osan mimena, we'll remove all of those from her in order that she be in a state of nivul, which is the opposite of beautiful. The achach mevi chevel mitzri, right? They brought this kind of very thick rope. Sha'osim yasiv shegadol svivas hadikolim v'koshro lemala mitodem. Amen.